The Pope called him a champion of Christ, a holy warrior defending the gates of Europe. But his enemies, and sometimes even his own men, whispered a different name for him, a tactical psychopath. He was the forgotten cousin of Vlad Dracula, and in many ways far more terrifying. Because while Dracula terrorized his enemies, Stephen the Great was willing to burn his own nation to the ground, to execute his most loyal commanders, all to forge a country in the fires of his own brutal will. This isn't just a story about a king, it's about how a monster became a saint, and how a tyrant became the father of a nation. To understand the man, you have to understand the world that created him, a world that demanded monsters. We're going deep into the unwritten rules of medieval warfare and the mind of a forgotten genius. If you're fascinated by history's most complex figures, make sure you subscribe, because this story has been waiting in the shadows for far too long. Imagine a place with no natural defenses, no great mountain ranges, no vast oceans to protect you. To the south, the single greatest military power on earth, the Ottoman Empire, fresh from conquering Constantinople. To the west, the ambitious Kingdom of Hungary, always looking to expand its influence. To the north, the enormous Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This was Moldavia in the mid-1400s. It wasn't a kingdom, it was a punching bag, a borderland where life was cheap and rulers rarely died in their beds. The boyars, the local nobility, were king makers and king breakers. They'd switch allegiance from Hungary to Poland to the Ottomans for a bag of gold or a promise of more land. Loyalty was a currency, not a virtue. And into this viper's nest, a young man with a famous family name and a blood claim to the throne was about to walk. His name was Stephen. Stephen didn't inherit his throne. He took it with cold steel. His own uncle, Petru Aaron, had murdered Stephen's father to seize power. For years, Stephen was in exile, bouncing between the courts of Hungary and his cousin's domain in Wallachia, Vlad the Impaler. It was Vlad who gave him the troops he needed. In 1457, Stephen marched into Moldavia. He didn't win through a single glorious battle. He fought a dirty, grinding campaign. He met his uncle's army near a village called Dolzhist and crushed it. But he didn't stop there. He pursued Petru Aaron relentlessly. This wasn't just about politics, it was personal. He had to make a statement. The boyars who had supported his uncle had to be shown that a new kind of power had arrived, one that didn't forget and certainly didn't forgive. His uncle escaped for a time, but Stephen had a more immediate problem: the boyars. They were used to weak princes they could manipulate, so Stephen taught them a new lesson. It's said that he captured 24 of the most powerful nobles who had betrayed his family and had them executed, not in secret, but in public. This was pure political theater. He was severing the old ties of power and forging new ones based on a simple, brutal calculus: loyalty or death. He was establishing a monopoly on violence. While his cousin Vlad was gaining a reputation for impalement in Wallachia, Stephen was quietly, efficiently purging his own country of anyone who might challenge his rule. The message was clear. The games were over. Moldavia would have one master. A king is only as strong as his army, and Moldavia's army was a joke. It was a feudal levy, a small corps of loyal boyars and their retinues. It was no match for the professional armies of his neighbors. Stephen knew this, so he did something radical. He turned to the peasantry. He created the Ostia Mare, the Great Army. Any free man capable of bearing arms could be called to fight. He armed them, he trained them, and most importantly, he gave them something to fight for: their land, their faith, their homes. He understood that a man defending his own farm is worth 10 mercenaries fighting for coin. His discipline was legendary and savage. Cowardice was punishable by death, but so was looting. This wasn't a mob, it was an instrument of his will, a massive, motivated force that knew the land better than any invader ever could. And what of his infamous cousin, Vlad? Their relationship is one of history's great what-ifs. They were family, allies in the beginning. Both were fierce defenders of their lands against the Ottomans, but their methods and ambitions differed. Vlad was a creature of terror and shadow, his power built on shocking brutality. Stefan was a builder, a strategist, his power built on statecraft and military organization, backed by that same core of ruthlessness. For a time, they were the twin shields of Christendom, but the politics of the region were a poison. When the Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, marched against Vlad, Stefan had a choice: help his cousin and risk war with a powerful Christian kingdom, or stand aside and consolidate his own power. He chose power. He stood by as Vlad was captured and imprisoned, a betrayal Vlad would never forget. With his home front secure and his cousin out of the picture, Stephen turned his gaze south, to Sultan Mehmed II, the man who conquered Constantinople, the most powerful ruler in the world. And Stephen, the ruler of a tiny backwater principality, decided to poke him right in the eye. The target was Chilia, a vital port on the Black Sea, controlled by Hungary but garrisoned by Wallachians loyal to the Ottomans. It was the gateway to Moldavia from the sea. In 1465, under the cover of darkness, Stephen stormed the fortress. He was wounded in the assault, an arrow to his leg that would plague him for the rest of his life. But he took the fort. It was an act of breathtaking audacity. He had just declared war on the Ottoman Empire, and Mehmed the Conqueror was not a man who ignored such insults. The Ottoman response was inevitable. A punitive force was sent, and here Stephen unleashed the terrifying doctrine that would define his reign. He refused to give the invaders a pitched battle. Instead, he turned his own country into a weapon. He ordered a scorched earth policy. Everything in the path of the Ottoman army was to be burned: the crops in the fields, the grain in the stores, even entire villages. Wells were poisoned with carrion. The population, along with their livestock, retreated into the dense forests and hills. The Ottoman army marched into a wasteland, a silent, empty land that offered no food, no water, no shelter. It was a strategy of unimaginable cruelty to his own people, but it was devastatingly effective. The invaders were starved, demoralized, and harassed at every turn by guerrilla raids that melted back into the woods. This hit-and-run tactic worked against smaller forces, but it only enraged Mehmed. In the winter of 1474, he decided to end the Moldavian problem once and for all. He assembled one of the largest armies of the era. Estimates range from 90,000 to over 120,000 men. A river of steel and faith, led by one of his best commanders, Hadem Suleiman Pasha. Their mission was simple: wipe Moldavia off the map and kill its defiant prince. Stephen could muster at most 40,000 men, peasants, minor nobles, and a few mercenaries. On paper, it was a slaughter waiting to happen. The entire fate of Christian Europe seemed to hang in the balance. Stephen sent desperate letters to the Pope and the other Christian kings. He begged for aid, and they all sent the same thing: thoughts and prayers. He was alone. He knew it. And that's when a great commander becomes a legend. He couldn't win a straight fight, so he wouldn't fight one. He chose the battlefield with the care of a master assassin, a place near the town of Vaslui. It was a marshy river valley, flanked by dense wooded hills. In the dead of winter, it was a miserable, boggy trap. And on the morning of January 10th, 1475, a thick, unnatural fog blanketed the entire area. Stephen hid the bulk of his army in the woods on either side of the valley. He placed his cannons where they would do the most damage. He then sent a small group of musicians, drummers and horn players deep behind the Ottoman lines to create confusion. The trap wasn't just the terrain, it was psychological.
Suleiman Pasha, arrogant and overconfident, saw what he thought was the entire Moldavian army arrayed before him. He ordered a full frontal assault. The Ottoman vanguard, the elite Sipahi cavalry, charged forward. They expected to smash through the peasant line in minutes. The Moldavians fired a few volleys, and then, as planned, they broke and ran. It looked like a rout. The Ottomans, sensing an easy victory, surged forward, pouring into the narrow, swampy valley floor. They were a disorganized, triumphant mob chasing a phantom. They were funneled exactly where Stephen wanted them. The ground became soft and treacherous, slowing their advance. The fog was so thick they couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. They were blind, deafened by the fog and the roar of their own advance.
Then the world exploded. From the wooded hills, Stephen's cannons opened up at point-blank range, firing into the packed, helpless Ottoman ranks. The effect was devastating. Before the shock wore off, the real Moldavian army hit them, not from the front, but from both flanks simultaneously. Tens of thousands of screaming peasants crashed into the long, disorganized Ottoman column. At the same moment, the musicians deep behind the Ottoman lines began to play, creating the illusion of another army attacking from the rear. Panic set in. The Ottomans were trapped. They couldn't advance, they couldn't retreat, and they couldn't form a proper battle line. The valley became a meat grinder. The disciplined Janissaries fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. It was no longer a battle, it was a massacre. The Ottoman army shattered. It was one of the greatest and most catastrophic defeats the empire had ever suffered. The Venetian and Polish ambassadors in the Ottoman court reported that the Sultan flew into a rage for days, refusing to see anyone. Turkish chroniclers wrote that never had their people known such a disaster. The casualties were astronomical. Stephen had not just defeated the Ottoman army, he had annihilated it. He captured their war flag, countless prisoners, and a mountain of treasure. The news spread across Europe like wildfire. This obscure prince from a forgotten land had done what no one else could. He had faced the full might of the conqueror and won a victory of biblical proportions. And overnight, Stephen the Great became the most famous man in Christendom.
Pope Sixtus IV, who had been trying desperately to organize a new crusade, hailed Stephen as the Athleta Christi, the champion of Christ. He praised his name across the courts of Europe. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be Stephen's friend. Kings sent him letters of congratulation. Chroniclers wrote poems about his victory. He was the hero of the hour, the shield of the faith. But Stephen knew better. He knew that praise was cheap. He hadn't fought for Christendom, he had fought for Moldavia. He needed more than just nice words. He needed money, he needed soldiers, he needed allies. Because he knew something that the celebrating kings in their safe palaces didn't. Mehmed was coming back, and this time the Sultan would come himself. The humiliation of Vaslui was a stain on Mehmed's legacy. He, the conqueror of 2 empires and 14 kingdoms, had been defeated by a provincial warlord. It was intolerable. In 1476, he assembled an even larger force, some say close to 150,000 men, and marched at its head. This was not a punitive expedition. This was a war of annihilation. He was joined by a Tartar horde from the Crimea who swept in from the east, burning and pillaging. Stephen was once again caught in a vice. He called for the aid he had been promised by the Christian powers. He begged Hungary for help. He pleaded with Poland, and once again they did nothing. They were happy to let Stephen bleed the Ottomans dry, but they weren't willing to risk their own skins. He was on his own again. Stephen knew he couldn't win a repeat of Vaslui. The Ottomans' army was too large, and Mehmed was too good a commander to fall for the same trick twice. He fell back on his scorched earth strategy, but the Ottomans were better prepared this time. Finally, at a place called Valia Alba, the White Valley, Stephen was forced to make a stand. With only about 10,000 to 20,000 men, he held off the entire Ottoman army for a day. His men fought with the courage of lions, but the numbers were just too overwhelming. The Janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry, finally broke their lines. It was a crushing defeat. Stephen himself was nearly killed, forced to flee the battlefield as his army was cut to pieces. Moldavia now lay open and defenseless before the Sultan's wrath. Mehmed had won the battle, but he was about to lose the war. Stephen, even in defeat, was a master strategist. He had lost his army, but he had not lost his kingdom. The main fortresses of Suceava and Neamt held out, refusing to surrender, and Stephen's scorched earth policy began to take its toll. The massive Ottoman army couldn't find enough food. Worse, an outbreak of the plague began to sweep through their camp. They were winning every battle, but were dying of starvation and disease. Stephen, meanwhile, had escaped to the north, raised a new army, and began harassing their supply lines. Mehmed, faced with a disintegrating army and a kingdom that refused to fall, had no choice but to declare victory and retreat. Stephen had lost the battle, but he had saved his country. He had proven that Moldavia could be broken, but it could not be conquered. For years, Stephen had walked a diplomatic tightrope, but his patience with his so-called Christian allies was wearing thin. In 1497, the King of Poland, John Albert, invaded Moldavia under the pretext of recapturing the Black Sea ports from the Ottomans. But Stephen knew the truth. It was a thinly veiled attempt at conquest. He played along at first, then cornered the massive Polish army, which was composed mainly of arrogant and heavily armored knights, in a place called the Kosmin Forest. He felled trees to block their path, trapping them. Then, for 3 days, his light infantry and cavalry, masters of forest warfare, tore the Polish army to shreds. It was another tactical masterpiece, a brutal lesson to anyone who mistook Moldavia for an easy prize. He had defied the Sultan, and now he had humiliated the King of Poland. But here is the great paradox of Stephen the Great. This man of war, this ruthless strategist who burned his own country, was also one of the greatest patrons of the Orthodox Church. Legend says he built a church or a monastery for every battle he won. He funded the arts. He endowed monasteries not just in Moldavia, but all the way to Mount Athos in Greece. The stunning painted monasteries that still stand today are his legacy. Was this a genuine act of faith, an attempt to wash the blood from his hands? Or was it clever politics, a way to unite his people under the banner of a common faith, creating a national identity strong enough to resist the Islamic Ottomans and the Catholic Hungarians and Poles? With Stephen, the line between piety and policy was always blurred. His 47-year reign was one of the longest in European history, but it was a reign of constant stress and unending warfare. He faced dozens of invasions. He fought over 40 major battles. He purged his own nobility multiple times, executing anyone he suspected of treason. He trusted few and was betrayed by many. He married 3 times, using his daughters as pawns in the great game of European diplomacy. Power had been his goal, and he had achieved it.
He had taken a weak, fractured land and forged it into a proud, independent nation that could stand against giants. But the fire he used for that forging had burned him as well. The young, ambitious prince was gone, replaced by an old, scarred, and perhaps lonely king. In 1504, as he lay dying, the old wound from the siege of Chilia having finally turned septic, he called his son and his council to his bedside. He gave them one last piece of advice, born from a lifetime of war. He told them that if Moldavia was ever in a dire situation, they should not hesitate to submit to the Ottoman Sultan, not to the Hungarians, not to the Poles, but to the Turks. It was a shocking final testament from the man who had fought them his entire life. But it was the ultimate act of a pragmatist. He knew the Ottomans, for all their aggression, often allowed vassal states to keep their customs and rulers as long as they paid tribute. The Catholic powers, he knew, would simply absorb and erase Moldavia. Even on his deathbed, he was a strategist, choosing the lesser of two evils to ensure his nation's survival. After his death, the church he had championed canonized him. He became Saint Stephen the Great. For centuries, he was a near mythical figure, the hero who stood alone. When the modern nations of Romania and Moldova were born, they looked to the past for heroes, and they found him. He became the father of the nation, the symbol of independence. The tyrant was forgotten, replaced by the patriot. The man who burned villages became the man who built the country. History is not always written by the victors, but it is always shaped by the needs of the present. And the people of that land needed a hero more than they needed the complicated, brutal truth. So who was he? A psychopath who used faith and patriotism as a justification for his own lust for power? Or a true patriot who understood that in a cruel world, only a crueler leader could guarantee his people's survival? Was the price of Moldavia's freedom the soul of its king? Perhaps the answer is that he was all of these things: a saint, a tyrant, a monster, and a father. He was whatever he needed to be to win. And in the 15th century, in that land drowning in blood, winning was the only thing that mattered. Stephen the Great's story is a reminder that history's heroes are often far more complex and terrifying than the legends admit. What's your verdict on him? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.